guys, it's Sayback here. Welcome back to my podcast. Today we're zooming in on the amazing world of cells, the tiny building blocks that keep every living thing alive and thriving. Let's dive into this microscopic adventure. Now, before we learn about the different types and parts of cells, we have to learn about what a cell is. Well, a cell is the smallest unit of life. It's the tiny, self-contained structure that carries out almost all the processes needed for us people, animals, and plants to stay alive. Cells are like a miniature factory. They take in nutrients and produce energy and also respond to signals and reproduce. Every single living organism, from a single tiny bacterium to the billions of cells in the human body, are built from these fundamental units. Now let's talk about the history and discovery of cells. Well, it started back in 1665 when a man named Robert Hooke peered through an early microscope at a slice of cork and noticed tiny rooms which he then called cells. A few years, a scientist named Antony van Leeuwenhoek observed living microorganisms swimming in pond water, which was completely new to science. These findings inspired Schleiden, Schwann, and Virchow to propose cell theory. This theory was that all living things are made of cells and that every cell comes from an existing cell. Now, let's talk about the two different types of cells. There are human cells, animal cells, and plant cells. But human and animal cells are pretty much the same. So, animal cells and plant cells do have quite a few similarities, like they both share a nucleus, a cytoplasm, and a mitochondria. But there are some special features that only a plant cell has, which an animal and human cell doesn't, and that's a cell membrane, a vacuole, and chloroplast. Now let's talk about these parts of cells and what exactly they do. Let's start off with the nucleus. The nucleus is basically the head of the cell. It controls what happens in the cell, and it controls the DNA, also known as the genetic information, which cells need to grow and reproduce. Moving on to the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is a jelly-like substance which is where chemical reactions happen inside the cell. Then we have the mitochondria. The mitochondria, well, they're the powerhouses of the cell, and they're structures in which respiration takes place. Now, respiration isn't just breathing. Respiration is actually a chemical process which happens in the cell. Next, we have the cell wall. This is basically an outer structure that surrounds the cell and gives it support, just like the name says. Now, the nucleus, cytoplasm, mitochondria, and cell wall are parts of a cell which both plants and animals share. Now, let's move on to the parts of cells which only identify for plants. Starting off with the cell membrane. This is kind of like the cell wall, and it surrounds the cell, but it also allows nutrients to enter and is basically like a second amount of structure. The vacuole is a space between the cytoplasm of a plant cell, and lastly, the chloroplast. A chloroplast is basically where photosynthesis happens. Photosynthesis is the process which plants use to make food. Because, of course, plants can't hunt like animals or just go and get food like humans. Plants make their own food using energy from the sun. And cells have something called a chloroplast, which is where this process called photosynthesis happens. Now, we've talked about the two types of cells, animal and plant cells, and also the differences between them. Like, plant cells have a cell wall, but animal cells don't. Plant cells also have chloroplast and a valcule, and animal cells also don't have that. And plant cells are actually usually rectangular, while animal cells are more irregular. Plant cells also store energy as starch, while animal cells store energy as glycogen, which even to me was quite a surprising fact. Well, if you like that fact, here's another one. Now that we know about the types of cells and the parts of them, I want to talk about the cell membrane. So think of the cell membrane as a living border. It's a fluid mosaic of lipids and proteins, and they constantly move, yet protect the cell. Some substances drift through by diffusion, while others require energy for active transport. This busy traffic keeps the cell well-balanced and functioning. And that's how the cell membrane works in the cell. So even though it's always moving, it does still keep the cell protected. And remember, cell membranes are only in plant cells, and they're never present in animal cells. Well, did you know that in every cell there's a tiny power plant called mitochondria? These are in both animal and plant cells. The mitochondria turns glucose and oxygen into ATP. That's just a chemical compound. And the cell's energy currency through cellular respiration. That's basically respiration because it happens in the cell. In plants, chloroplast captures sunlight to perform photosynthesis, storing energy in sugars. Every heartbeat, though, and movement relies on this microscopic energy network. And that's how every single cell gets energy. Now that we know about animal and plant cells, let's talk about two completely different types of cells. Those are prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So, prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells are types of cells a bit wider or more depth than animal and plant cells. Prokaryotic cells, like bacteria and archaea, are simpler. They have no nucleus and their DNA floats freely in the cytoplasm. Because of this, they also lack a membrane-bound organelles. Organelles are basically all these different types of cells, like mitochondria or also the valcule. Eukaryotic cells, which make up plants, animals, and fungi and protists, they're a bit more complex. They have a true nucleus to house DNA and specialized organelles such as mitochondria and chloroplasts. Now that we know about all of the types of cells, let's talk about some specialized cells. Specialized cells are basically cells which are a bit different to other cells. One example being red blood cells. Red blood cells, as you might know if you've listened to my cardiovascular system podcast, they carry oxygen throughout the body and they have no nucleus. Instead of this, they have something called a hemoglobin, which gives it its red colour. They also have a biodonate shape, which basically means a shape different than most other cells. Like plant cells have a rectangular shape, and while animal and human cells have a more irregular shape, but it's mainly kind of flat. Red blood cells, though, have a dip in the centre, making it have a biodonate shape. Another type of cell is a root hair cell. These have large surfaces and, well, they're good for water absorption. And the last specialized cell, which I'm going to mention, is a muscle cell. This has a lot of mitochondria for energy. Now, you might be thinking, a muscle cell? But aren't muscles tissues? Well, that brings us to our next idea, which is organization. Just like how you might organize your homework, or anything really, cells and pretty much the whole universe has a specific organization as well. It starts with cells. Well, one single cell. And then a lot of cells join together to make a tissue. A lot of tissues join together to make an organ. Organs work together to make organ systems, and organ systems work together to make a whole organism. Every single living thing is an organism, and they each have cells, tissues, organs, and organ systems. So these muscle cells, all of these muscle cells join together to make a tissue. Then those tissues join together to make an actual muscle, which is an organ. And then a lot of muscles join together to make the musculatory system. And all of those other organ systems, along with the musculatory system, join together to finally make an organism. Now, there's one last thing I want to mention in this podcast before we talk about modern application of cells. So basically how we study or use cells today. And that's cell division, which is also called mitosis. Mitosis is basically how body cells divide to grow or repair. One cell divides into two identical cells, and each cell will have the same number of chromosomes. This helps with growth, repair of tissue, and replacing old damaged cells. And finally, modern application. Today, powerful electron and confocal microscopes allow us to view cells in astonishing detail. Gene editing tools like CRISPR give scientists the ability to rewrite DNA with precision, and researchers can now grow miniature organs or organoids to study diseases and test new treatments. From Hooke's cork slice to lab-grown organs, the exploration of cell has reshaped medicine and technology and will continue to do so for thousands of more generations. I hope you learned something new in this podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to my podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts, and stay tuned for the next one. Bye for now.